All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Gin and Tonic. I'm joined by Cultured Jinni.
Hello.
Yes, so today it's going to be a special kind of episode, and it's going to be me talking about ancient Egypt. Cultured Jinni is going to do a small presentation on uh, Islamic and Roman Egypt, I believe. I'm also covering slightly Roman Egypt as well, but I'm going to be covering ancient Egypt in advance. And this is going to be pre-recorded because this week I'm in Vancouver for some family and work-related issues. So if from now on, if we're going to leave for some work-related things, I want to pre-record and release in this manner. Let me know in the comments how you guys liked it. Culture Jinni, anything you want to add before we start getting into presentation?
No, nothing more than that. I feel bad for not having this kind of PowerPoint presentation, but I will just show maps and
Oh yeah.
such.
Oh yeah, no, presentation is only there when you have no substance. So I have a presentation because my substance is a lot weakened than yours.
Go.
Yeah, so let's get this PowerPoint going. And just as a thing, if you can tell me if you can see it.
I can see you clearly.
All right. So this is a presentation on ancient Egypt, and just as a thing, pre-dynastic Egypt started at 4,300 BCE and ended at around 6,000 or 600. 600 CE, with the Roman invasion, where it just ended up becoming a so in the Persian Empire, I'd say, even though it was its own satrapy and its own governorship, the true end of Egypt came at the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, in my personal opinion, which ended at around, and then the Roman invasion. So it was still a province of the Roman civilization, and that was around 600 CE. I think is the last known king. Would you say that's a fair assumption? Culture Chin?
I mean, the thing is that it depends really how you consider Egypt to be Egypt. If you consider it, Coptic and the Hamitic languages that were spoken up until the Arabs began to force, or rather, Coptic became replaced by Arabic. So they did speak the local language for a long time there. So you could say that Egypt continued and ended their classical Egypt, but also you could set the date even before the Persian invasion, where
Yeah.
the last native dynasty was.
Yeah, so probably like the 25th dynasty, I'd say, right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I'll be giving information based off of per dynasty, and I've broken it up into different ages as well. Tried to get as many images from the dynasty as I could, but yeah, let's go into it to see. So this is for pre-dynastic, so 4,300 BCE to 3,000 BCE. Just because of the sheer time gap that we had from then to now, we just can't find as many artifacts as we would like. So we wouldn't know too much about the kings and such that lived in that area, other than basic pottery and very basic hieroglyphs. So Nakata 1, a Rameshian dynasty. So this is around from ca 4,300 BCE to 3,600 BCE, approx. So the culture is still similar to the Babylonian culture, and then the mummification process was very rudimentary compared to the more complex mummification that we had closer to the 20th dynasty.
The
Yeah.
Iranian culture, is that is that classical Egypt or classical Bronze Age Egypt or?
Yeah. This was like yeah, it's very so they were more of the immigrant bases towards the edge of the Nile from the Central Africa.
All right.
And this is when you get larger tombs. So this is when the first, what we would consider Egyptian culture, of the mummification and the prayers, actually started building up the tombs and such. Um, but it was still very rudimentary in many cases. So here we have some pottery. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is the kind of pottery that we would see. Not as complex as the later years. And then in the Nikata 2 or the Gerzan, um, this is when Egypt actually started growing a lot more, and then they were building more architecturally advanced tombs. So here, this is actually a flint and what they would be using for cooking in two different pots. So you can actually see more of an artistry in the pots itself, and more so of a more refined culture, closer to what we know now, start showing up. And this is pre-Bronze Age as well. And then this is when so the Nikeda 3, this is when we start seeing wealthy burials and more of a hieroglyphs. So this is on the right side, we see an actual hieroglyph from the area, and this is actually considered one of the first hieroglyphs in forms of writing from that region in Upper Egypt. This was from 3150 to 3000 BCE. So that's when we go into the early. So that was the setup for the pre-dynastic. So what we consider Egypt or ancient Egypt starts off with early dynastic, but the cultures didn't quite start directly at 3000 BCE. They started 1,300 years before that, and it's common. It should be told about what kind of pottery and what kind of devices that they were using. That was the start of this dynastic culture. So anything you want to add to that culture, Jenny, before we go on?
No, not much more than to know that these are like we have signs of civilization from this time,
Yeah.
but we don't really have any written scripts or something that we can really interpret. We have just remnants of this Stone Age civilization.
Yes. And now,
And some sort of indications that there were happened some changes in it during these two periods.
yes. And to bring the complexity and the severeness of the start of this early dynastic or pre-dynastic period, there were still woolly mammoths when the pre-dynastic age was still present or started. That is how old it is. There were woolly mammoths that were still present. This is on the border of the last ice. We're at the end of the last ice age, in essence. So this is we still had civilizations per se, but we were coming off of the ice age based hunter-gatherer civilizations according to archaeology. Now you got people like Graham Hancock and such who say, oh, there's more advanced civilizations prior to the young Darius, the comet impacts and such, but I don't want to be going on more pseudoscience based that doesn't have 100% archaeological evidence that we would now with the pottery. But the fact that we have pottery that shows that there was some sort of groups that were more, for lack of a better word, civilized. I wouldn't say civilized per se, but some sort of a society that's not a hunter-gatherer with the pottery and the hieroglyphics. Just shows that Egypt was well ahead of its time for that era. That was just basically post-Ice Age. So the next one, early dynastic, this is from 3000 BCE to 2675 BCE. Now, mind you, until the Old Kingdom, the dates are quite iffy just due to the lack of the archaeological evidence for these. I wouldn't say lack of it, but just the little amount that we have. So the dates are iffy in my research. I tried to find I used the University of Memphis for my dates and data because they are the most accurate ones. So in the first dynasty, we get more of the hieroglyphs that we would see, and then its first capital was Finis. There were two main. Let me go back. There were two main pharaohs at this time, Merneph and Den. Merneph was the first female pharaoh. Take a close look, Islam. You're not the first people to make kings or queens. Egypt was well ahead of you, almost by 4,000 years. She might have been the queen regent, or for her son Den, who we'll also talk about here, or just ruled as both king or queen. And she was buried close to Den, and with the tomb that's at the same scale as the other tombs for the kings of that era. So she was treated very equally as a ruler. And then a lot of the historians that talk about ancient Egypt were essentially Greek and Roman historians from the Roman Empire. So that's why a lot of the names will be written in Greek form. The first pharaoh depicted wearing a double crown of Egypt, the first pharaoh with the Nevis Bidi name, is Den. So you can see Den's hieroglyph on the right here, and then you can also see Merneph's hieroglyph on the right. For the second dynasty, my dyslexia is going to act up, so I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name. But the exact length doesn't, like we said, we don't know much about the archaeology there. Hard to find bits of conquests and it being desert. But Turin canon actually suggests that this gentleman ruled for 95 years. It's quite improbable. But the ancient Egypt historian Manetho reports that Manetho is more of a reasonable historian, a bit more accurate than the holy source scriptures, as you will, but some of his are still exaggerated. He says that the reign of Boetos is 38 years, whereas Egyptologists actually consider that a statement to be somewhat of an exaggeration or misinterpretation, both of them. They credit the rule to be either 25 or 29 years. And then this is his hieroglyph on the right. And then we have Nebra, the next king of this dynasty. The exact rule of his reign is unknown since the Turin canon is damaged and the year's accounts are lost. Manetho suggests that Nebra's reign lasted for 39 years, but Egyptologists question Manetho's review as misinterpretations or exaggerations of information that was available to him. Like I mentioned, during this time, a lot of historians during that time were paid by the pharaohs, so although he was some more accurate than the Turin canon, he was still exaggerating a bit due to being on the payroll. And they credit Nebra with either 10 or a 14-year rule. Nyanjatur, and then the Turin canon also suggests that he ruled for 96 years. Manetho says that he ruled for 47, but Egyptologists say that this is also somewhat an exaggeration. They generally credit Nyanjatur to a reign of either 43 or 45 years. Their estimate is based on the reconstructions of the well-known Palermo stone inscription, reported the years of 7 to 21. The Cairo stone's inscriptions report a 36 to 44. And we also have the stone's inscriptions and his statue here that we can see. According to different authors, he ruled between 2850 BC to 2760, or later from 2760 to 2715. So his exact dates weren't 100% known as well, but this is the closest we can get to archaeological evidence. So would you have any points to add before we go into the Old Kingdom culture, Jinni?
No.
All right. Yeah, and I apologize if like my stuff is a bit more boring. But yeah, like I actually have to like cut this down by a lot to.
I mean, you do have to have overview of things and just mention the most important things anyway. So
Yeah, let me just see if like my audio is actually recording here, or we'll have to like restart. Ah, shit. My mic fell off. 1 sec. We might have to restart everything. Let me just check the audio. All right. Hello. Can you hear me, Culture Jinni?
I can hear you.
All right.
Did it record the audio?
Yeah, it recorded audio. What happened was like my mic, its wire came out slightly, so I was like, "Oh shit, did we record anything?"
Oh,
Yeah. So let me just move you slightly here so the audience can see. You like this. There.
I can be in the background. I don't.
All right. There. All right. There's
Yeah.
Culture Jenny for you guys. All
Hello,
right.
guys.
Yeah. So let's get back to the presentation here.
Yeah.
And if you at any point have any questions, you can always say, "Hey Nick, what's this? What's that?" Ah shit. Let me from current. Uh, you gotta be shitting. This is here just to like irritate me for some. All right. So now we're at the Old Kingdom. Um, this is from 2675 to 2130. Again, from the University of Memphis. This isn't me saying it. This is the University of Memphis saying it. So the third dynasty, that's when we start seeing the tombs of royal burial sites like this on the right. There's links of the kinship between the Cacique and the third dynasty, but the changes are between them is marked by the definite shift the royal burial place to Memphis. And the first kings, and the first king is Senecte, and it is basically attested in the beliefs from Magahara in Sinai.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and Josir, the Horus name, Netjerkiat, I believe. Again, I'm horrible with Egyptian names or Coptic names, so please do excuse me, guys. Was one of the outstanding kings of Egypt from this era. And then you have the fourth dynasty. You can start seeing more of the intricate pyramids that we see in terms of tombs here. The fourth dynasty of Egypt is characterized as the golden age of olden Egypt. It was a time when the peace and the prosperity, as well as one of the most trade was with other countries, is documented. So it's really good for that era. And then the fourth dynasty heralded the height of the pyramid building age. So the relative peace of the third dynasty allowed the fourth dynasty rulers to be at leisure. And when you're at leisure, that's when you start building more arts as a kingdom. Most of the arts came from a time of peace and a relaxed era. Uh, the king's Neferu Out's building experience led to the form of the mastaba style stepped pyramid to smooth sides, true pyramids, which are those that are most commonly seen on the Giza plateau. And no other Egypt's history equaled the fourth dynasty's architectural accomplishments. Many of the pyramids you see, not just the pyramids of Giza, the three big ones, but the other buildings that you see in that era were based off of this time, and then because every king in this uh, dynasty built their own tomb before they died. They almost had a contest to see who could build the biggest tomb for themselves. And next, you have the fifth dynasty. The fifth dynasty of kings is a group of 9 kings that ruled Egypt for approximately 150 years, the 25th to 24th century BCE. And the relative succession of kings is not entirely secured, as there are contradictions between the historical sources and the archaeological evidence regarding this reign. It's not as well. The turn in canon was actually destroyed for this time period as well, so we don't know the exact successions. We know who they are, but not when and where each one of them ruled. And then you go into the sixth dynasty. So from 2350 to 2710 BC, and it's supposed to be switched around a bit, but yeah, the dating that I received was a bit iffy. The sixth dynasty is considered by many authorities as the last dynasty of the Old Kingdom, whereas Oxford actually says the dynasties 7 and 8 are also a part of the Old Kingdom. Memphis doesn't say so. So Manetho rates that these kings ruled from Memphis since their pyramids were built in Saqqara, very close by one another. But by the fifth dynasty, the religious institutions had established itself as the dominant force in society, and a trend of growth in the bureaucracy and the priesthood. There was a decline in the pharaoh's power that had been established in the Nefer Kake's reign. So it's this was a time when more people, the pharaohs were more of the priests. I mean, were more of the ministerial kind of role, and they were almost like they had powers that would rival that of a senator, right? In the Roman Empire. So yeah, it was the pharaoh originally was seen as a god or a descendant of a god, whereas now the priests were more so in power, shifting that. Now during Jekar's Lesse's rule, officially were endowed greater authority, and there is evidence by the opulent private tombs they constructed, eventually leading to the creation of the feudal system in effect. Culture Jinni, if just for the audience, if you want to explain what a feudal system is.
Feudal system is a system of social, you could almost say that social agreements between one that controls a fee for a land area and lets people work on it in exchange for various services, and in turn these thieves with their landlords are connected to other more powerful rulers in a chain of hierarchy and with various personal agreements between persons. It's a very informal system of governance where you have various agreements on various levels with each other rather than a standardized system of these people are this and thus they have these rights. Rather, it's very much a case to case basis.
Yeah,
Feudalism is actually very hard to describe in short terms because it's a very nebulous system, but it usually has to do with that you have some local rulers that are below another ruler, and they kind of manage their own land and their own area according to their own whim, but they are still subservient to a higher ruler.
yeah, and it's like the the best way to explain it would probably be Japan pre uh, pre-British control. So I believe from like the 17th century to
Japan,
19th century.
British control. Japan was never under British control.
Oh no, no, wait,
Uh,
who
b-
was it?
b- b- Japan pre the shogunate,
The shogunate.
Tokugawa
So yeah,
shogunate.
so in the shogunates, there was a very feudal. I'm thinking, who was it? Was it either British or the Americans that came up to them were
It
like
was the
helping them?
Americans that came with the gunboats, but that was later after the Tokugawa had taken control and more or less centralized and standardized everything. Before, Japan was more split into various regions with their own warlords that nominally served the emperor but had their own power base and their own rulership.
Yeah. So just so people, because the feudal one, it's more like the way for people in India, the way you can understand it is more like a zemindar, where there was one big guy, but like they would have local zamindars who owned the land and essentially were regulating tax controls. And
Yes.
yeah,
You
so
you you had estates that worked the local land and answered to the higher authority, but also had great regional local power.
yeah,
And it was also important that the central power did not overstep its bounds and touch these local powers. It was, a very relationship of give and take and of, informal
yeah,
alliances as well as formalized.
yeah. So basically, with this trend though, that kind of feudal system, uh, it decentralized authority, coupled with the growth of bureaucracy, intensified the 3 decades of Unas's rule, which witnessed an economic decline. So the 7th and 8th dynasty grouped together kings, followed by the decline of the 6th dynasty in the Old Kingdom. They are also known mainly through some kings list or Meneto. A few kings attest by some rare contemporary sources, and they seem to have ruled from Memphis. It's only credited with these two dynasties are only credited with 20 years, which means that its kings either ruled for an average of about a year, or that several kings ruled from several different locations at the same time. Again, probably the feudal system. They broke it off into like various estates, and they were ruling from there, and everyone claimed to be like the supreme leader. But like, yeah, no, there was like probably 3 or 4
It
sections.
seems, yeah, it seems to have been a period of extreme decentralization.
Yeah, considering what,
Pre-
yeah,
you, Previously, you had one ruler that everyone answered to, but the more and more it began to be that local rulers or local governors and representatives got more and more power, and then they become a ruler in their own right in these areas, and then they broke away and become various, smaller kingdoms.
yeah. It was possible that some of these kings are not attested through some archaeological sources, but it was an error in the compilation of the kings list. So yeah, it might be an error. It might be a few things. We don't know what the hell happened just because of how bad the 6th dynasty went. Picking up from there was really tough. Yeah, and I know what most people think they had time, but getting off of a feudal system is very tough. So now we're at the first intermediate period from 2130 to 1980 BCE. The 9th and 10th dynasty that was founded on Heracleopolis Magna, and the 10th dynasty continued from there. Like I said, Greek historians were studying this, hence the Greek names. At this time, Egypt was not unified, and there are some overlaps between these and other dynasties. The Turin Canon lists 18 kings from the soil line, but their names and such are damaged, unidentifiable, and lost. Would you like me to pull up the definition of the Turin Canon just for the audience, or do you have a definition, working definition, culture gene?
Oh, you can pull it up because I am not that into older Egyptian history.
Yeah, so I want to put it on our screen here, but I just forgot to add the slide. Basically, it's a list of the kings made by Ramses II, and is now in the Egyptian Museum in Turin. So it's basically pieces and such. I'll put an image for people to see in the description, but basically it was a list compiled during the Ramses II time about all the kings that happened, and it was destroyed, lit on fire, broken, this, that, and 100 other things. So the fact that we can even get what we have now is absolutely amazing. But a lot of the information on it was lost. So yeah, then we have the 11th dynasty, the first part, and then the relative chronology of the 11th dynasty is established by contemporary Tazicians, and except for the Count Intif and Metuhotep, the fourth, by the Turin canon. Basically, Manetho's statement that Dynasty 11 consisted of 16 kings who ruled for 43 years is a contradiction by contemporary inscriptions and the evidence of the Turin kings list, which combined testimonies established that the kings consisted of 7 kings and ruled for a total of 143 years. Probably understand why he got some of these things wrong, but like yeah, it's Memphis. The University of Memphis also agrees that it's 7 kings who ruled for 143 years. However, his testimony um, that this dynasty was based in at Thebes is verified by contemporary evidence. It was during this dynasty that all of Egypt was united under the Middle Kingdom. So they went from the different feudal lands to one major Egyptian kingdom based along the Nile. And the dynasty traces its origins to Nomarch of Thebes, Intef, the great son of Iku, who is mentioned. So there were multiple mentions of him in the inscriptions down in the University of Memphis. However, his immediate successor, Mentuhotep the first, was considered the first king of this dynasty. Depends on what source you're looking at. So, an inscription carved through the reign of Vahank Intef II shows that he was the first of this dynasty to claim to rule over the whole of Egypt, a claim which brought the Thebans into conflict with the rulers of Heracleopolis Magna, Dynasty 10. Intef undertook several campaigns northward and captured the important nome of Abydos. So we don't know if he was fighting, like if he had the control of Egypt at the time, but he was fighting for it a lot. So if anyone could do it, it was him.
What's a nome?
So nome of it's a region or area, Abydos, near
All
the
right.
yeah. So the Middle Kingdom, 1980 to 1630 BCE. So this went on around like 350 years. The warfare continued intermittently between the Thebans and Heracleopolitan dynasts. So this was near the Greeks as well. So they went around the Mediterranean up as well, near the area of like Constantinople or Istanbul, essentially. Constantinople would be so near Damascus. Uh, so on.
Wait. So this dynasty actually managed to conquer their way up to the Hittite territory.
Yeah, essentially.
All right. Because I know that the Anatolian Peninsula was currently under the control of a people known as the Hittites.
Yeah, and the Hittites actually come a bit later as well in terms of conflict here, but the
Right.
Thebans and such also had their conflicts around this area. I found a map which wasn't 100% accurate according to the University of Memphis, so I didn't quite want to include it there.
All right.
But yeah, the rulers of the 11th dynasty asserted Egypt's influence over her neighbors in Africa and the Near East. Uh, Mentu, Mentuhotep II sent renewed expeditions to Phoenicia,
Tun-
and
Tunisia, that's modern day Lebanon.
yeah, so Sankara Mentuhotep III sent an expedition from Coptus south to the land of the Punt. I believe
That's
that's
Somalia.
Somalia, and I was thinking like Kenya, Somalia. Yeah, the region of the last kings and thus ending the dynasty is somewhat of a mystery, but the contemporary records refer to 7 empty years following the death of Mentuhotep III, which corresponded to the reign of the Mentuhotep the Fourth. Modern scholars identify the wiser Amenhotep the First, the king of the 12th dynasty, as a part, and there was a coup at the time, which is what most people think, to during the 7 empty years, and they say that this time period was remarkable omens that were witnessed, and yeah, it's not quite as clear what exactly happened during this time because it was so quiet, but there was a lot of coups that happened just because of the conflict. And then we have the 13th to 14th dynasty. Now the dates again aren't as certain. Um, it's a series of rulers that reigned during the second intermediate period over the Nile Delta region of Egypt, and it lasted between 75 to 155 years, depending on what scholar you're talking about. And the capital was probably Avaris. The 14th and the 13th dynasty, both simultaneously uh, were based in Memphis. So two separate kings. So you had the north and the south kingdoms. And now we have the second intermediate period. Is there anything you would like to add, Culture Chin?
Oh,
All right, yeah. So this is when you get to the second intermediate period. I have the map here as well. Going down. So yeah, the 15th dynasty was a foreign dynasty of Egypt coming in from Anatolia this way, but yeah, there were two major regions that we would mainly worry about. Uh, it was founded by Saleh Hykosis from West Africa, whose people invaded the country and conquered Lower Egypt. And the kings of the 15th dynasty are said to have been Canaanites. Do you want to help out a bit with telling the audience who the Canaanites were, Culture Jin?
this is actually pretty problematic because at this stage we don't actually know what the Canaanites were. We think that they are like later a Semitic people. In other words, a people that have their origins together with, the Hebrews, the Assyrians, the Arabs, the Himyarites, and in southern Arabia, and the various Ethiopic peoples. But the problem is that we actually do see a lot of genetic differentiation in the last 500 years, before and after the Bronze Age collapse. And that does give indications that the Canaanites can have changed drastically during this period.
Probably because of the invasions and such that was going on.
Yes, so we actually don't know what the Canaanites are during this time, but they could. The the problem is also that just because the genetics change doesn't mean that the culture change, and vice versa. You can have culture change without large genetic changes also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Turkey, they speak Turkish, which is a language that originates from the steppe. Of course, there was a couple of Turks from the steppe that came down and conquered the Anatolian Peninsula in the past. But,
Yes.
genetically, they are closer to, the Greeks that are their neighbors than any, steppe peoples from Central and Eastern Asia.
Yeah.
So such could also happen. So, but we could, probably they were a Semitic people, but we are not entirely certain of this.
Yeah. So to continue here for the 15th dynasty, the pharaoh Camels was often referred to uh, uh, Apophis, so one of the kings of the dynasty, as the chieftain of Ret Jenu, so Canaan. The kings of the 15th dynasty formed the second Asiatic kingdom in the delta, covering an area which may have included Canaan itself, although the archaeological record is sparse. The dynasty lasted for a period of about 108 years. And then we
Yes,
go into. Yeah, go ahead.
one other possibility is also that these people were also kind of related to the Egyptians. I mean, the thing is that the language of Egyptian, which would later become Coptic, is actually related to the Nubian languages that are more upstream to the Nile. And I mean, it's not entirely impossible that it spread even further to the north and east. Canaanites might have been Hamitic speakers during this time, rather than Semitic speaking peoples.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I think it becomes a bit more clear in like the 16th dynasty, but later when the Hittites and the Canaanites become, I wouldn't really trust their sources though, because they were somewhat of the enemies here in the
Yeah,
conflict. But basically, the 16th dynasty is a dynasty of pharaohs that ruled the Theban region of Upper Egypt for 70 years. This dynasty, together with the 15th and 17th dynasty, are combined under the group title of the Second Intermediate Period, a period that saw the division of Upper and Lower Egypt between the pharaohs at Thebes and the high cost kings, uh, which were based together in the 15th dynasty at Avaris. So they were united for a brief bit, but then split up again in the 16th. And so one of the two chief versions of Maneto's book or the text is that the 16th dynasty is described by the more reliable Africanus as the shepherd kings, but by Eusebius as Thebans. So some Egyptologists, Reicholt and Borot, in reconstruction of the Turin canon, interpreted a list of Thebes-based kings to constitute Maneto's 16th dynasty, although this is one of the Reicholt's most debatable and far-reached conclusions. So we don't quite... most of the canon is missing, so we can't really come with too much of a solid evidence for it. So, yeah, so let's just move into New Kingdom here. Do you have anything to add before we go into New Kingdom?
no,
Jenny? Yeah. All right. So, the 18th dynasty, this was the map for those who can see. The 18th dynasty of Egypt, commonly noted as in Latin and such, is classified as the first dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt, in the area where ancient Egypt achieved the peak of its power. This dynasty is also known as the Tutmoid dynasty, with for the four pharaohs named Tutmos. Several of Egypt's most famous pharaohs were from the 18th dynasty, including Tutankhamun, whose tomb was found by Howard Carter. So you guys, everyone probably heard of Tutankhamun, right? He was from this period. So other famous pharaohs of the dynasty included Hatshepsut, and she was the longest reigning woman pharaoh of the indigenous dynasty. So, how much earlier from Islam was this culture, Jinni?
This is 1800 years. More than, you know, this is more than, 2000 years from Islam.
Yet somehow Islam was the first one to give woman empowerment. Shh. Let's not let the secret get out.
No commentary.
Yeah, basically the 18th dynasty was unique because the dynasty actually had two women who ruled as sole pharaohs, and they were also some of the most innovative rulers. So this is when Nefertiti, one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs, were from. So then we get to 19th dynasty, also known as the Ramesside dynasty. It's usually classified as the second dynasty of the ancient Egyptian New Kingdom, and it lasted between 1292 to 1189 BC. And then the 19th and 20th dynasty were more together constitute the era known as the Ramesside period. This dynasty was founded by Vizier Ramses I, whom Pharaoh Horemheb chose as his successor to the throne. And because in the 18th dynasty there was little resistance from resistance from the neighboring kingdoms, it allowed them to expand their realm of influence easily. But the international situation had radically changed towards the end of that dynasty, so more resistance. The Hittites had gradually expanded their influence into Syria and Canaan to become a more power in international politics, a power that both Seti I and his son Ramses II would have to confront in the future. And then this is the 20th dynasty, where you still had the Ramesside period, but this is when the start of the decline of the power of ancient Egypt started. So the consistent theme of the dynasty was the loss of pharaonic power to the high priest Amun. Horemheb, a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, had restored the traditional ancient Egyptian religion and the priesthood of Amun after their abandonment by Akhenaten. So they had a lot of conflict of the religion itself because, like, the pharaoh was originally considered God.
It was, yeah, Akhenaten, wasn't he the one that tried to, introduce monotheism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before, pharaohs were actually considered the descendants of God or the son of Ra or whatever. Now it was with the high priests were more the intermediates between God and people rather than the pharaoh. The position of pharaoh no longer commanded the same power that it had before. Now we go into the third intermediate period, the 21st dynasty. It was after the reign of Ramses III. There was a long, slow decline in royal power. The pharaohs of the 21st dynasty ruled from Tanis, but were mostly active in Lower Egypt. This dynasty is described as Tanite because the political capital was based in Tanis. And then, meanwhile, the high priests of Amun at Thebes effectively ruled Middle and Upper Egypt because they had more uh, power on paper. In the later years, priest Manetho of Sabantos states in his epitome on Egyptian royal history that the 21st dynasty of Egypt lasted 130 years. Yeah, so this was when more of bringing in monotheism is what started the decline of the Egyptian empire, I'd say. Would you say that's fair analysis?
I mean, I would say that this also coincides with the, Bronze Age collapse and the, chaos that is brought there, which are a lot of external factors together with climate change and a lot of other things. I mean, if you look at the Assyrians, or the Mesopotamian region, if you look at Southern Arabia, if you look at the Hittites and the 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 kingdoms found in Anatolia and the Greek kingdoms of the Messenia and Greece, they are collapsing at this time or
Yeah,
just before this. So it's just a general age of chaos and collapse.
yeah. Yeah, no, the 945 BC, yeah. That was when a lot of the conflict happened in various kingdoms. So I kind of agree with that too. 22nd dynasty, also known as the Bubsite dynasty. And since the pharaohs originally ruled from the city of Bubstatus, so it's founded by Shoshenq I. The pharaohs of the 22nd dynasty were a series of Meshwesh, Libyan tribe chieftains. So this is when you had people from Libya as well, who ruled from 943 BCE to 716 BCE, according to the University of Memphis, guys. They had settled in Egypt since the 20th dynasty and were known in Egypt as the great chiefs of Ma. Ma being Meshwesh. Manetho states that Egyptianized ancient Libyan dynasties first ruled over Bubistis, but the rulers almost certainly governed from Tanis, which was their capital city, where their tombs were excavated. Now, the tombs were often excavated outside of the city as well, or distant from the capital, right? Yeah, so it really, so if, again, it is a long distance from Bub status, so yeah, it's kind of an iffy thing. But yeah, no matter where they ruled from, it was more of a foreign occupation per se. So yeah, it's more of the kings, and then they only controlled a small portion of Lower Egypt from Memphis. Now, this is usually classified. The 23rd dynasty is usually classified as the third dynasty of the ancient Egypt, third intermediate period. And this dynasty usually consisted of a number of Meshwesh kings who ruled either as pharaohs or as independent kings as a part of Upper Egypt and pharaohs. And there is still much debate surrounding this dynasty, which may have been situated at Heracleopolis Magna, Hermopolis Magna, or Thebes. Now, again, a lot of Greek names because a lot of Greek historians at the time, especially and Macedonian, considering the Ptolemaic dynasty.
Because they record these things later
Yeah,
with
monuments.
Greek names.
Yeah, like it's what get like you got to be fair though. Like the Macedonians As much as they were for raping and pillaging, they did a good job of noting everything.
Yes, they did.
Um, so yeah, now we have the 24th uh, dynasty, who are a short-lived group of pharaohs. I believe there's only two major kings that were there. The other ones were like smaller ones. But yeah, their capital was Sais, from the western Nile Delta. So Tefnech I formed an alliance with the Delta kinglets. With the support, he attempted to conquer Upper Egypt. So during this time, he also talked a lot with the Nubian king. Uh, and he was also called the Great Chief of the West in Pi's Victory Stela, and in two stelas dating to the original regnal years of 36 to 38 of Shawshank 5. It's uncertain if he ever adopted that official title of Great Chief of the East, or the West, I mean. Uh, so this back in Renif is the successor of Tefnech I, but it's definitely assumed that the throne of Sais took the official royal name of Wahakari. His authority was often recognized in much of the Delta, including Memphis, where several year 5, year 6 Serapeum stelas from his reign have been found. This dynasty came to a sudden end when Shebito, the second king of the 25th dynasty, attacked Sais, capturing the king or pharaoh and burning him alive. This 25th dynasty is the Nubian dynasty, the Kushite Empire, and the Black Pharaohs, or the Napatan, after their capital Napata, was the last dynasty of the third intermediate period of Egypt that occurred after the Nubian invasion. Nubia was, is it fair to say, like the southern African kingdom?
Yes, I mean, explaining this thing is that the Kushites or the Nubians were actually always considered a part of kind of the same civilization as Egypt. Sometimes they were an independent kingdom from Egypt, sometimes they were part of it. So these people weren't really foreigners in the way that we would imagine it. They were rather an other part of Egyptian civilization. They had their own pyramids and the like also. And they had the same gods as the Egyptians. So they were, and their own language was very close to Egyptian always. It was also Hamitic. So they are pretty much. This isn't so much a foreigner coming to conquer such as much as it is the southern Egyptians conquering the northern Egyptians, kind of.
Yeah. So basically, like same, but not same, uh, as James Franco would put it. But yeah,
Yeah.
most of the dynasty's kings saw Nepta as their spiritual homeland, same way Memphis was at some point in Egypt. They reigned in part or all of ancient Egypt for nearly a century. And by 25th dynasty was highly Egyptianized, using Egyptian language and writing system as their medium of record and exhibiting an unusual devotion for Egypt's religious, artistic, and literary foundations. So yeah, and then the this was when it was also unified. So the upper, lower, and the Kush were all unified during this time. And now we're at the late period. So we have the any before we go into it, do you have any comments, Culture Jinni, until this point?
really, just that the Kushites are pretty much a part of the Egyptian civilization even before this. I mean, this is kind of like saying that the Macedonians were different from the rest of Greece, but
Yeah,
they weren't. They were the same people.
yeah,
It was
Macedo.
just that they were another political entity.
Yeah, the Macedonians were just the redneck Greeks.
Yeah, and the Kushites are kind of the same to the Egyptians here.
Yeah, they're basically the Texas. All right, so we got the late period. So the 26th dynasty of Egypt was the last native dynasty to rule Egypt before the Persian conquest of 525 BC, although others followed. The dynasty's reign from 664 to 525 is also called the Site period because of the city Sais, where its pharaohs had a capital. This dynasty traced its origins to the 24th dynasty. So Samtik the first was probably the descendant of Bakan Renif, the guy that was burnt alive. Following the Assyrian conquest of Egypt by the Neo-Assyrian Empire during the reigns of Taraka and Tantameni, and the subsequent collapse of the 25th dynasty, Samtik the first was recognized the first king of Solo of Egypt. If you guys remember, the the 25th dynasty with the Nubians actually unified all of Egypt. So all of Egypt was now under control. So basically, Samtik formed alliances with the king Gades of Lydia, who sent mercenaries from Caria in ancient Egypt, which Samtik used to unify all Egypt under his rule. And with the sack of Nenheb and the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, both Samtek and his successors attempted to assert Egypt's power in the Near East. But that's when the conflict between them and Babylon was there. Now, they did have the Greek mercenaries that did help out in the invasion, but yeah, uh, eventually by 525, uh, Egypt was conquered by the Persians. Samtek III, or Samtek's grandson, was killed. In the 27th dynasty of Egypt, also known as the First Egyptian Satrapy, effectively a province of the Achaemenid Persian Empire between 525 and 404. It was founded by Cambyses II, the first king of Persia, Shahanshah, I believe, or Chakravarti. In Telugu, it's called Chakravarti. In Hindi or Urdu, it's called Shahanshah. I believe I forgot what it's called in Persian. Any? Do you know what like the emperor was called for the Persian kingdom in Persian?
I think it was Shahushal or something like that,
Yeah, yeah, because I know.
but since I can't speak any Persian language, I can't speak Farsi or anything, so I can't.
Yeah, I speak a bit of Hindi and Urdu, right? So I know Shahanshah means king of kings. But yeah, I don't know any Persian or Farsi, so that's the issue there. So it was basically disestablished upon the rebellion and crowned. So there was a huge rebellion there. Um, and Amirtrius was crowned the pharaoh during this time. So, as pharaoh of Egypt, Cambrius' reign saw a fiscal resources of the traditional Egyptian temples diminishing quite considerably. So, one decree written on papyrus in Demotic script ordered limitations of resources to all Egyptian temples, including Memphis. So yeah, the Persians were basically like, "Hey, don't follow the ancient Egyptian language anymore," and they were trying to push more of their uh, kingdom, or more of their religion on there. And then Darius the First took over in 522. You probably heard of Darius, um, right?
Yes,
Yeah. So this isn't
famous.
yeah, this isn't the famous Darius that you know, but this was an ancestor of the Darius
All
you
right.
know, and a local. And just to be a little pissy, like you got to understand the vastness of the Persian Empire at this time. Some
Yeah, it's
local,
gigantic.
yeah, a local prince either was incredibly stupid or was incredibly brave and just called himself Pharaoh. He was later killed. Um, his and basically during this time, Egypt just marched himself, and Darius just marched himself and introduced a lot of tariffs into Egypt. 28,
Rise the Great.
yeah. Same thing in
It's the Rise the Great, isn't it?
yeah,
If I'm, he also began to expand into Anatolia and into Thrace, if I'm not entirely.
yeah. So there wasn't much in the 29th dynasty, so we'll just go into the 30th dynasty. The 30th dynasty of Egypt is the fifth dynasty of the late period of ancient Egypt, and it was founded after the overthrow of Nefertiti II by Neknabi I and was distinguished upon the invasion of Egypt by Achaemenid Empire Artaxerxes III. So Xerxes, you guys, it's not the same Xerxes as 300, not a 7 foot man that had slightly homosexual vibes. It was a different Xerxes. So this was the final native dynasty of ancient Egypt. After the deposition of Nekhnivo II, Egypt fell under foreign domination. Now we get to the great pool of incest known as the Ptolemaic dynasty. You guys might know Alexander the Great. He ruled all of the Persian Empire at the time and the Macedonian and Greek. Uh, so he became the hegemon of the Greek alliance, meaning the Grand Master of the army. Became the Shahanshah of ancient Egypt, or of ancient Persian Empire, and then didn't even have to fight in Egypt, just walked and got the crown of Pharaoh, and made Alexandria. One of his generals, Ptolemy Soter, started the dynasty of the Ptolemaic kingdom, and it lasted till 30 BC with the death of Cleopatra the Seventh. Now, Cleopatra is commonly talked about being one of the most prettiest people. It was she. Normal people have eight grand, eight great grandparents. Culture Jinni, that would be normal, right? Eight great grandparents, right? Now let's guess how many great grandparents Cleopatra the Seventh had. She had a grand total of two. So she was not the prettiest. Alright? The fact that she had a working pair of lungs is a goddamn miracle. But what she was known for is being a great conversationalist. She loved to talk, she knew multiple languages, and she was able to woo uh, the Roman Julius Caesar and Mark
Yes,
Antony.
and Mark Antony later. Yes.
So yeah. Um, Yeah, so basically the Ptolemaic dynasty had the Library of Alexandria, great knowledge base, but was later burnt down by the Romans. So yeah, that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Culture Jinny, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not really. Just that now we are going to get into how Egypt is more or less dominated by foreigners until more or less modern time.
Yeah. So yeah, let me just rearrange this so that your uh, window can be shown as well. Hey everyone, welcome to the white background. Alright, so add. So let me just pull this open. So, um, let me just go into. Are you streaming their culture, Jinni? If you can show your screen.
All right. I'm trying to, but I'm two screens, show entire screen. You see?
Yes. So let me just pull this up. And let's put this into full screen. Here, pop it out. And let's remove this here. And then we'll do this. Nick is learning how to do his own productions nowadays. So please do bear with me.
No
Let's
problem.
select uh, or remove. Alright, let's remove this. So all this blank space will be edited out. Don't worry, Culture Jinni. Alright, so
You see the map I found here.
so if I do this, yes, I see it.
All right.
Alright,
Should I
so
just begin or?
yeah, you can just begin. Just give me 1 sec. I'll tell you when to go. Alright, you can go, Culture Jinni.
All right. Where Nick left off with Rome having now conquered Egypt from the Ptolemaic dynasty, it is important to know that Egypt remained as an important part of the Roman Empire for a long time, and also of the Eastern Roman Empire. And it went through all of the changes that happened in the Roman Empire also affected Egypt. So when Rome began to convert to Christianity, so did Egypt. However, Egypt had a little bit of a difference from the rest of the Roman Empire in that they didn't convert into the same sort of Christianity as had been promoted after the Council of Chaldon. They were a Miaphite. They were mainly followers of a type of Christianity known as Miaphite Christianity. This is what becomes later the Coptic Church. In that they, for example, believed that the nature of Jesus was very different. It wasn't two natures in one, but rather one divine and human nature in one nature. The Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Orthodox churches believe that Jesus had two natures in one person. These believed Miaphites, which is also the kind of theology and view of Jesus that is existent in the Church of the Oriental Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, has this view that Jesus was just one nature of divine and human in one. And this might sound like a little thing, but for a lot of people, for a couple of hundred years after the revelation of Jesus, this was a very important point of contention and conflict, which meant that Egypt, where this was the majority view, suffered during Roman repression a lot. And as Egypt suffered under repression, there was a lot of resentment towards the Roman centralized state. And when Rome also began to split up into West and the East, and the West eventually fell, the Egypt became also a lot more important, as it was a larger part of the empire now in comparison to the whole of the empire. But it was also beginning to feel the pressure. For example, due to various wars of the Eastern Roman Empire, like a war with the Sassanids, the darker shade of pink, which you can see here, the Egyptian province had also been taxed much more heavily than before. And it was also so that a lot of local rulership in Egypt had begun to become discontent with the Romans' inability to protect them during the 17th century. And the Romans had also used a lot of local mercenaries or local elites in order to, pacify the region. And they had even allowed Arabs, just like the Romans in the West had taken in Germanic peoples to use in the army as feudalati. The Eastern Empire had done the same with Egypt and the Palestine area. So when Islam came during the middle of the 17th century with the Arabic invasions, a lot of people in Egypt actually welcomed the Arabic invasions during the 17th century rather than rejected them, because they felt that they got a better deal. So when the invasion happened under Amr ibn Alas in the year 640, he actually did not get much resistance from the locals, and there was actually support for him taking over, because they felt that it was better to live under Muslim rule than under the repression of the centralized Eastern Roman state. And Amr ibn al-As, his commander that took
Hello, Culture Jinni. Can you hear me? Culture Jinni, you broke up there for a quick second. Culture Jenny, I would check your internet connection a bit. I'm getting. Alright, so there isn't any. So sorry for technical difficulties, guys. We're back. So Culture Jenny,
right.
yeah, you left off
Yeah.
saying that Egyptians were already subjugated to a lot of oppression.
Yeah, because they not only were they, oppressed because the centralized state of the Eastern Roman Empire wanted to, try to convert them into their version of Christianity. They also had enormous tax burdens imposed upon them due to conflicts, especially conflicts with the Sassanid Empire, which is this darker pink here. They also had, a lot of local rulership that were getting stronger locally and wanted to be more independent from Rome. They also had a lot of feudality mercenaries, both of Arabic and Berber origins, who weren't always the most loyal to the, Eastern Roman state and also welcomed the Arabic invasion when it came. So when the invasion came under a guy known as Amr ibn al-As in the year 640, there was actually a lot of support for it. So Egypt fell in a couple of years pretty quickly to this invasion. And the Romans were, defeated and kicked out.
All right.
They had already
Can you hear
conquered
me, Culture Jinni?
Syria and, the Levant before. So they were already cut off from it, but so the Romans couldn't really, prevent this occupation even if they tried, but also the locals were against Roman domination. So what happened was that it got pretty quickly integrated into, the Rashidun Caliphate. And when the conflict between Ali and Muawiyah, which would mark the end of the Rashidun Caliphate and the beginning of the Umayyads came, Amr bin al-As sided with Muawiyah and gave him his support, which meant that Egypt supported him, and this was one of the turning points which really allowed Muawiyah to take control of the rest of the Umayyad Caliphate, or rather take control of what would become the Umayyad Caliphate. Or Umayyad Caliphate. God, which is this.
Yeah, and we'll put up an image of that as well if you can send that to me, Culture Jinni.
I'm just taking it up like this.
Yeah.
This is what it's going to become when it's its greatest extent. But during the Umayyad period, Egypt is just another region of this very large empire. But the Umayyads adopt a policy of more or less Arabic supremacy, which means that the Egyptians were not Arabs, but are Hamitic speaking peoples, are actually rather repressed during the Umayyad rule. From the, middle of the 7th century to the middle of the 8th century. Which 661 to 750. They are not only are they more or less treated as second-class citizens or second-class subjects, they are also, forced to adopt Arabic as their language during this period, as the Umayyads adopt Arabic as the official state language before it had been Greek, and they have a language policy of forcing this new language. So Egypt is becoming Arabized in a kind of second-rate Arab. They become kind of second-rate Arabs during this period because the Umayyads preferred, pure Arabs. There was actually, a
But what gets
policy
me,
that
but what gets me though
yes,
is Coptic. So even the Greeks or the Persians never forced Egyptians to become second-rate Greek or Persian
No,
citizens,
they just had they just had the language as the official language
but they never because like
as of state,
yeah
but they
because
didn't force it upon people like the Umayyads did.
yeah because like one thing that gets me is like we've seen that the Coptic language has been going on for around 5,000 years by this point, right? So it's
Yes.
highly, in my opinion, highly refined and highly civilized as opposed to Arabic.
Yeah, I would, contest that that is how language functions. But the thing is that the Umayyads, I don't know if they did this in Egypt, but they did it in other places where they forced people to speak it, or they would cut off the tongues of people that didn't speak Arabic. And they also treated, those that began to speak Arabic, because you had to do it in order to not face persecution, also as a second class citizen because they weren't really true Arabs. They or even used the term Mustaribun, which are like wannabe Arabs.
Yeah.
So the Umayyads had a larger presence, but that's not everything. They also had actually a strong support of local allies in Egypt. So what they would do is that they would create a system of certain groups in Egypt, because not everyone that lived in Egypt were Egyptians. There also existed Berbers, Kushites, and some other peoples that the Kushites were close to the Egyptians culturally, but there existed several other peoples than just Egyptians. And what the Umayyads would do were that they would impose a kind of system of privilege to certain groups above others. And at the same time, they would try to Arabize them. So what happened was that they actually had rather strong local support of various groups in Egypt that could, help in their control of Egypt. And what also emerges during this time is that they begin during the Umayyad period, but you see it even more during the later Abbasids when they take over, is that strong estates based upon awqaf, or what I would call a waqf is a donation that is given to a mosque congregation in order to be used. So what you have is that you have various lands that belong to, farmland that belong to various mosque congregations and powerful people that control these mosque congregations or lands that evolve into a sort of powerful estate elite, almost based upon controllership of farmland. So they also are kind of in support of Umayyads because they have been given, due to various recruitment schemes of soldiers being given preference in these systems and being given land in exchange for military service. The Umayyads actually do have control of Egypt, and they think of Egypt as, after Syria, as their second most loyal province, which actually turns around and becomes a problem because when the Abbasid revolution in the year 750 begins, the 14th caliph of the Umayyads, Marwan, flees to Egypt because he thinks that in Egypt he will gather support and be able to resist the Abbasids that have made this revolution against the Umayyads. However, when he arrives in Egypt, a lot of local, powerful elites decide, nah, it's better to get rid of Marwan. So he is killed in Egypt.
Yeah, no, it's.
Enter, enter the. Yes, is there anything?
Oh no, I was just gonna say like it's rather odd that like it's Egypt would probably be considered his most or their most successful province, right?
Yes, because Egypt was the breadbasket also.
Yeah.
It and the area of Iraq are some of the most fertile areas in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And it was even Egypt was also the breadbasket for the Roman Empire for a lot of its time. So it was important to have control over it. So the Umayyads also thought that they had better control of it than they had. But when the Abbasids take over, they actually begin to, pull back a lot of these discriminations against non-Arabs, or at least non-blood Arabs. And but Egypt is still kind of, it is a province. It's subservient to the Greater Abbasid
Yeah.
state, and the thing is that what I said about how estates begin to emerge based upon the awqaf or the endowments given to various mosque congregations and the various leaders of these mosque congregations, is that they begin to grow discontent with the Abbasids because they feel that the Abbasids are kind of ruling and they want to rule their own regions locally. So what has happened with the Abbasids when after they've taken over from 750 is that we are seeing more and more friction between the various local rulers in the Abbasid Caliphate, which I can show here. It's the light green area. The Umayyads are left in the dark green during this period. But anyway, what we are seeing is that a lot Egypt, like all of the regions of the Abbasids, are beginning to want to break away. And what happens is that it reaches a fever point during a period that's known as the chaos in Samara, or Fawda Samara, the chaos of Samara or anarchy of Samara, which lasts from 861 to 870. During this period, you also have a large rebellion, a slave rebellion in Iraq known as the Sanchi Rebellion, and a lot of other things going on. And
Yeah.
then in this period, we have the rise of a dynasty known as the Tulunian or the Tulunid dynasty that lasts from 868 to 905. And it begins by a guy that is known as Ahmed ibn Tulun, who was a Mamluk Turk. Let's say he was a slave soldier, but he also acted as a governor. He and a lot of other slave soldiers, because the Abbasids had adopted a system of making slaves into soldiers to fight for them. They took the chance to rebel. Ahmed ibn Tulun is actually pretty interesting because he is one of those very interesting characters that managed to integrate himself locally into Egypt. He managed to get the Awqaf estates on his side through promising a lot of things, and he also markets himself when he makes his rebellions and tries to break away from the Abbasids, because he was appointed to be a governor of this area due to
Yeah.
his military accomplishments. But he actually, despite being he and the rest of the Tulunids being of Turkic origin, they actually try to integrate themselves and try to, when they do their rebellion, try to present themselves as being the first true Egyptian dynasty, since the Romans had conquered them. So they say, oh, we are actually here for the Egyptians. We are the people, so to say. And
Yeah, no, but
this,
what about the 30 dynasties before the Romans came in?
yeah, but I mean, what they are saying, or what they are kind of trying to, paint themselves as is that they're painted them as the, native dynasty, like the previous ones. But, they are Islamic still, but, they are for the local people. But eventually, they, Ahmed ibn Tulun and those that come after him actually do not manage to really, improve things, which means that they get eventually also, disposed and the Abbasids take over again. So the Abbasids manage to regain control of Egypt during the year 905.
Yeah.
But this is an example of the first really true large slave soldier rebellion that succeeds in something. But the Abbasids, when they take over Egypt, they send their soldiers in order to secure it again.
Yeah.
And these soldiers are more slave soldiers. So you can guess what happens later, can't you?
Oh yeah. An army of slaves all rebel.
Yes. So you have the Ikhshid dynasty under a guy known as Bin Turj. And the Ikhshid dynasty lasts from 933 to 969. And the thing is, he was given this Ibn Turj. They had controlled this area for 30 years since they had managed to bring down the Tulunids.
Yeah.
But they gave just into a 2 years period after they had appointed this Ibn Turj to the power in Egypt. He rebelled. And unlike Ahmed ibn Tulun, who had taken power in order to consolidate his rebellion and see to it that it didn't descend into total chaos once he, renounced the Abbasids and said, "Oh, I'm now independent." Bin Turj and the Ikhshidiyun more or less took power directly at the first opportunity, which resulted in a lot of chaos and extremism. They also had very strange. Well, there isn't much information about them, but they seem to have had very strange Sufi or almost allied, ideas. They weren't Shia, but they weren't, extreme Sunnis either. They were kind of something in between in certain regards. They
They were probably changing
they-
up some of their beliefs slightly to incorporate the local population.
yeah, probably. But what they did was that they became also very fractious. So we don't have just Ikhshidiyun doing one thing there that is controlled from the central Egyptian state. I can show how they were. Ikhshid. No, not Khalid dynasty, Ikhshid. There is the Ptolemide dynasty. This is the Ptolemaids. They actually managed to get pretty far up before they were defeated. Here are the Ikhshid dynasty, which more or less, this is actually a kind of exaggeration of how far they went. The thing is that they weren't really one unified state. What they was a group of more or less joined rebellions at the same time that swore, fealty to the Ikhshidiyun, but more or less did their own things. And the problem with this is that they were more or less chaotic extremists, which also meant that they got into a conflict with a lot of their neighbors and with locals all over the place. So it was total chaos. And they also got into a war with a state or kingdom that was known as Al-Makura, which lie in modern day Sudan and some parts of Egypt. And the thing is that this kingdom, this Christian kingdom, which had existed there for a long time because the earlier Umayyads and Rashiduns and even the Abbasids had not conquered them due to various political reasons, because they want to use them as a buffer zone against another empire that was further down, known as Axum, which was in this area. This area shouldn't be under the control of the Ifshidiyun. But the thing is that this kingdom of Al-Makura even managed to conquer a lot of their territory. So yes, they got more or less, they got beaten on the battlefields in several places, and they, after a period of extremism, lost. And then they got replaced by another dynasty, known as the Fatimids. Yeah, who managed to conquer Egypt during the Caliph Al-Mu'izz.
Oh, and to confirm, all this was a defensive war, right?
I mean, the Ikshidiyun weren't really defensive. They were kind of a complete chaos extremist group
Oh yeah,
of
no.
various
All the
interests.
conquering and like the spread of the Islamic Empire was apparently self-defense. So that's why I asked.
Oh yeah. According to the Muslims, I would say that they were just like any other state during this period. They conquered each other and did horrible things to each other. But anyway, the Ikshidiyun were too, splintered, too chaotic, attacked everything, and were pretty much that period's ISIS, just even more disorganized and chaotic. So they got replaced by the Fatimids. The Fatimids were took over through support by the Kutama Berbers. They made an alliance. They came from originally they came from Arabia, as they are descendants of Ali's line through Ismail, as they are Ismaili Shia Muslims, and the Ismaili Shia line of caliphs. But they had their power base in Tunisia, and they managed after that, or Morocco, Tunisia area, and they managed to conquer their way and conquer Egypt. And then they established the city of Qahira, or Cairo. And they eventually took over Egypt and made it their center of power. And this actually, for the first time, Egypt actually becomes probably the most important place in the Middle East. Again.
I'd say as a breadbasket, it was always important, but the people just.
It was all. Yes, but now it also becomes a center of commerce and of learning, because the Fatimids, especially under several of the Fatimid caliphs, and especially under Al-Hakim, but even before him, begin to give patronage to various institutions of learning. Al-Azhar, the famous Sunni Islamic university, actually started as a Shia Ismaili entity.
No way.
What?
No, I was just saying, no way. That's such a transformation, though.
Yes, but I'm going to get into how it transformed. But the Fatimids, they are, Shia Ismaili. So they aren't 12er Shia like we have in modern day Iraq or Iran. So they are another Shia branch. And the Fatimids actually begin to do a brutal suppression of Sunni Islam, Christianity, and 12er Shia Islam
Oh,
within
there you
their
go.
borders. This is actually now really the Abbasids had tried to, do conversions into Islam, and a lot of people in Egypt had converted into Islam, but into their Sunni Islamic beliefs. But it is during this period we really see the large-scale conversions in Egypt from Christianity into Islam.
Yeah, and I still think the Coptic Christians are quite oppressed there as well, currently, modern day. So their
Yeah, and
oppression
during
still
this
lasts.
period, during the Fatimids, we see brutal oppression. We see slaughters, especially during Al-Hakim bi-Amrillah, which is one of the caliphs during this time. And we also see that, you know, ironically though, the Fatimids had actually pretty good relationships to a kingdom in the south known as Al Makura, the state that had fought against the Idiun and actually beaten them,
Yeah,
and even more south to with the peoples in Ethiopia. They actually had pretty good relations with those Christians, but the Christians within their realm and also outside of it, they had very to the north. They had very bad relationships with, and you did horrible oppression, and they also did horrible oppression to Sunni Muslims and to other Shia sects. So to that degree that Al-Hakim bi-Amrillah is known kind of as one of these Shia Fatimid caliphs is actually kind of known as the insane caliph due to how oppressive and how he there is a lot of stories that paint him kind of like the Islamic versions of Caligula. I would say that he's actually a lot more complex than this, but the Fatimids are known as very pretty brutal Shia rulers overall, and they were in many regards. But the Fatimids last from 909 to 1171. And what happens in 1171? Well, the thing is that they actually became a little bit less centralized. And this is a story you will, remember from the earlier dynasties, non-Islamic Egyptian dynasties, how rulership become decentralized and then it becomes chaotic. And the Fatimids are the longer the Fatimid period goes, the less power is centralized in the centralized Fatimid caliphs, and they become more and more dependent upon local rulers. And one of these local rulers just so happens to actually be a Sunni Muslim in Syria, where they are up and conquering here, with the name of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Al-Ayyub, Al-Ayyub, who was a Kurd. And you know him as Saladin. And
so
what he does is more or less, yes,
no, just listening. No worries. Yeah, just agreeing. So show you that I'm actually here.
yes. And what he does is more or less that he becomes the, representative, a vizier of the Fatimid Caliphate. But he does what many of the other, rulers before during the various Mamluk rebellions had done. And that was that he began to make alliances with local rulers in Egypt. So when the last Fatimid Caliph Al-Adid, Lidin Allah, died, he proclaimed himself ruler of Egypt and managed to take it over through a very complex strings of plots with various locals and various other, centers of powers, especially local land estates.
Yeah.
And the thing is that he was a Sunni Shafi Muslim. So what he did was that just before Al-Adid died, he proclaimed his loyalty to be to the Abbasids. Because as Saladin weren't from Quraysh, he couldn't proclaim himself to be a caliph. He couldn't say, "Oh, I'm the local caliph now, leader of all Muslims." He couldn't do that as he wasn't from, descended from the tribe of Muhammad. So what he did instead was he said, "Oh, but I'm the local sultan, acting on behalf of the Abbasids back in Iraq, because the Abbasids are still around, but they are, kind of powerless almost. So they can't even, they can't control Saladin, but he can still use them to legitimize himself and say, oh, I'm acting on their behalf now, and not on the false caliphs of the Ismaili Fatimids.
Yeah.
So he changes allegiance in order to legitimize himself among the Sunnis, where he uses a power base in order to get more powers. And he also begins a process, and his later descendants also, of converting Egypt back to Sunni Islam from Shia Islam. And this leads into very brutal suppression of Shia Islam and of the Ismaili Shia that existed in Egypt. And he converts Al-Azhar from a, Shia institution into a Sunni institution to spread Sunni Islam. But there's also one thing with Saladin, which is kind of beside the point. Since he also wants to be kind of get a legitimacy for himself outside of just being the subservient sub-sultanate of the Abbasids, he actually adopts Roman symbolism in order to legitimize himself. So he says that, oh, I'm also bringing back, Roman glory and such. This is why I'm kind of an Eastern Roman Empire as well as being this sub-sultanate of the Abbasid dynasty. And this is why the dynasty of Saladin, the Ayyubid dynasty, uses a double-headed eagle. I can show it.
Yeah.
So what we have is a period here that harkens back, just like the previous. Here's the double-headed eagle. Sometimes it's single-headed, but it's a Roman eagle.
Yeah.
And so we have just like the Tulunids tried to say that they are, oh, we are a native. We are like, the previous dynasties that were native and cared for Egypt. What they are doing here is that they are harking back to Roman Egypt. Saladin, or rather, not just Roman Egypt, but Rome generally. And this is Saladin's greatest extent of power.
Yeah.
Anyway, what happens, and this is a gradual thing, is that Saladin reintroduces, the Fatimids had been dependent upon local groups. They didn't have slaves. They did have slave soldiers, but they had been more dependent upon local allies. What the Ayyubids do after Saladin is that they become more and more dependent upon slave soldiers again, just like the Abbasids generally had been. And the thing that happens, you can guess what happens when you become dependent upon slave soldiers. Hello,
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah. No, I'm just saying it's like a lot of rebellion.
Yes, because, being a slave and fighting for someone else against your will, being forced to it because you have grown up into it, doesn't make the most loyal of soldiers. So what happens is that the Ayyubid dynasty during the take over during the 13th century gradually. They replace the Ayyubids partially in various areas, and eventually they take over Egypt.
Yeah.
So, and this, and they are also one of a few examples of an Islamic dynasty before the Ottomans that have a crescent in their flag,
Yeah.
which also is a Roman symbol which they adopted from the Ayyubids, who had adopted a lot of Roman symbolism. But this is the Mamluk Sultanate which replaced it. And this is a very decentralized state. This looks like, a unified empire, but it was not. It was a lot of, local rulers and especially a lot of landholders who owned land
Yeah.
combined with a military elite of Mamluk soldiers who had taken over certain areas. They are actually, there is kind of of a transition period where they are still on paper the Ayyubid dynasty, but in practice they are the Mamluks. So this happens, gradually. And during this period, they also managed to expand down into the kingdom of Makuria. The kingdom that had defeated the Exhidion and even conquered up and then allied themselves with the Fatimids here under military occupation. The Ayyubids during Saladin and later the Mamluks are the reason as to why Sudan is Arabic speaking.
Yeah.
Because before, Sudan had been speaking, Nubian or Hamitic languages, which were closer to Coptic than they were to Arabic. So this dynasty actually conquers down and unifies the entire, classical Egyptian area and makes it
Now,
into the.
yeah, culture Jinni, I wanted to ask you a quick question. I couldn't really find.
Yes.
So is Coptic, like ancient Coptic, more so like Egypt, like Latin, where it's slowly dead now, or can we still find like its resembling languages spoken in the region?
Coptic is not used in everyday conversation. It's a liturgical language that's only used in Coptic church.
Yeah, so more so like Latin, it's not used in general day now.
No. But the thing is that during this period, we see also movements and the migrations of Arabic groups within Egypt and within this area down into the kingdom of Makuria here during the Mamluk, which means that now this is the reason as to why Sudan is an Arabic-speaking country.
Yeah.
So they are actually pretty late in being converted culturally from their Hamitic-speaking peoples into, Semitic-speaking Arabs.
Yeah. So at this point,
So
yeah,
this is actually the first period on a very long time that the entirety of the classical Egyptian territory is unified during the Mamluks. This has never happened before during the era of post-Roman control.
yeah. And surprisingly, the way that they were giving respect to the region, I honestly think the Romans did a lot better.
I mean, the thing is that it wasn't like the Ayyubids. Sure, they were very brutal and forced conversion, but they were also very flexible and gave a lot of autonomy to a lot of regions, which also meant that it got taken over later by the Mamluks. And it's very easy for us to interpret things with our modern view of these things, but the past was a very different place
What it is now.
than it was back then. And I mean the fact that also that the Ayyubid dynasty was so 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 steeped in using Roman symbolism and harking back to Roman times as well, also shows that they saw the world much differently than we see it today.
Yeah.
Because for them, it wasn't, this contradiction when they think, oh, Roman against Islam. They thought they were, kind of, oh, but we are the legacy of both Islam and Rome. Kind of like how the Ottomans would do later.
Yeah.
And they also harken back to it and the Egyptian period of Roman rule as kind of a good period in their propaganda to legitimize themselves. But the Mamluks took over. And, you know, the Ayyubids and the later Mamluks had introduced the Shafi school of fiqh, and they were also Ash'ari when it regards to Aqidah. Fiqh is the jurisprudence of of Islam, and they belong to the Shafi school of interpreting Sharia, and
Yeah.
they also were Ash'ari theologically, which is Aqidah in Islam. So they believed this. But the problem is that when the Ottomans conquest of Egypt came in the 16th century, they took over, Egypt. Actually, they didn't go far down, but they took over most of Lower
Nile Delta.
Egypt here,
Yeah, the Nile Delta.
Nile Delta. And the problem was that the Ottomans were Hanafi, Maturidi, Sunni Muslims. You know how I meant how the Fatimids had brutally
Yeah.
suppressed the other Shia sects and Sunni Islam? Well, now you get to introduce, and how the Ayyubids later, when they took control, did the same. Well, now you have now you have Sunni versus Sunni Islam. So you have during several hundred years following the Ottoman conquest, both in Syria and in Egypt, you have local rebellions and local insurrections going on due to the Ottomans wanting to impose their will upon this region and wanting to impose their view of Islam.
Yeah. So at this point, like I'm just looking at the clock. My time in the studio is actually coming to a close in like 20 minutes.
Uh,
But
all
yes,
right, I'm trying.
yeah. So just giving
All
you a
right,
heads up. We got
yeah,
around 20 minutes left.
yeah, yeah. So you have conflict there with they don't want to be a subservient region that isn't respected, just like very similar to how Rome treated Egypt before, in that they had very different views upon Christian theology. They now have different views upon Islam between the Ottoman and the subservient region of Egypt, between the Ottoman Empire and the subservient region of Egypt. So this is pretty much this conflict in reverse again.
Yeah.
And this goes on and off on the period, and eventually this period begin to break away. But you also have the invasion of Egypt by Napoleon, which kickstarts
Bonaparte,
a
right?
period.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, by Napoleon.
And I think his was mainly for the goal of getting Alexander's body, wasn't it?
It was a part in the conflict between the other imperial powers and the Ottoman Empire. He wanted to secure things and weaken the
Yeah.
hold of the other European powers. So it was a part of that. But and it happened in the 1798 to 801. And Napoleon's conquest of Egypt actually kickstarts what is to later become the Nahda or the Arabic Renaissance, because when Egypt is conquered temporarily by the French, it comes as a shock because this is, a monumental change when these Europeans are coming with Enlightenment values from the French revolutions and introduce them into, the Arabic world and, humiliate the Ottoman Empire. This also makes Egypt a lot more independent. They are still a part of, the Ottoman Empire. Then later it also becomes, under due to a series of events under British rule. But the Egyptian people begin to become much more independent again. And Egypt begins to develop into a center once again of Arabic culture, just like it had been under the Fatimids and the Ayyubid dynasty. And it becomes an important hub of knowledge or literary production during the Nahda. And it's more or less said that there is a saying that goes more or less that Egypt makes the books, Syria reads the books, and I've forgotten how it goes, but it's something like that. It becomes a very important hub. And then later, after decolonization, and the British goes back, you have for the first time truly native rulers. I mean, people like Sadat and like taking power and being at least from Egypt, but many of these people are problematic due to corruption, due to conflicts of power.
And then they're probably not truly native as well because of all the migrants from like Morocco, Algeria, and such from like the French Empire.
I mean, I would say that they are native. I mean, eventually you must say that you are native at a certain point, but when we go into really modern history, it becomes so close and so complex because it's directly connected to us that you can't really simplify it without getting into issues. So I think we should stop here with the Nahda and how Egypt, after the French invasion, actually begins to become a center of knowledge again and becomes an important part of the Arabic world.
For sure.
Reawakening.
So in that case, then we'll put a whole stop to the episode here. Thank you so much, Culture Jinni. I learned quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone thank Culture Jinni, and I think you had recently released a video similar to this, like with Roman Empire, right?
Yeah, did something similar, I think.
And so that will actually be in the description. We'll link a video that's similar to this that Culture Jinni does or whatever.
That was the Ottoman Empire, how it adopted Roman customs and the like.
Yeah, so in that case, we'll get Culture Jinni's channel on here where he talks about the Ottoman Empire. Please do check out his channel. This has been very informative. Everyone, please do leave a comment. Please like, please subscribe. I'm officially a YouTuber now. I'm using Streamlabs. So, and please leave your reviews in the comments. If you like this pre-recorded style whenever we leave, we'll continue doing it in this manner. I absolutely love this, but it is an effort. So unless the audience really wants to see this kind of thing, I personally love doing it. So if the audience does want to see it, I'm happy to get this sort of stuff.
Yeah, you also have to be very brief when you discuss these things, and I think that I jumped over a lot I wanted to go into because I thought I would have more time. But yeah, went in a good overview at least.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you so much, Culture Ginny. Let's stop the recording right now.